Hello, everyone, and welcome to One Teacher, One Scientist chat room. Today, we have a very distinguished guest with us, Arvind Gupta. Uh, I think he's the most well known person as far as science goes, and has been advocating, like how science should be taught more hands on. It's been like his toys, the making of the toys has been his prime pedagogical approach, how children can actually learn while they make. So I am so honored, sir, to have you here. And it's a Padma Shri by the government of India. And it was basically his pedagogical approach towards teaching science that has been so passionate that I'm so honored, sir, to have you in our chat room today.
Thank you, Vaishali.
So I just want to understand from you how children should be taught science right from the beginning. How important is it for children to build a scientific temperament and, right from early childhood?
I think that India as a country was one of the first countries in the world to put a clause in our constitution that the state would endeavor to build in scientific temper in its citizens. One of the first countries. Jawaharlal Nehru, leading the way. He stood for science. It was his dream to have a microscope in every school so that the children could peer into the micro world. But having said this, the fact remains that we have not made much headway in this. India has made a lot of progress, but a lot more needs to be done to nurture this scientific attitude amongst its citizens. Basically, a questioning mind, a critical approach to everything, a skeptical mind. A skeptical mind is one which does not accept anything on face value.
Yeah.
It asks for hardcore evidence, it asks for proofs, it asks for replication by others. Just because it comes from an authority is not enough proof for that. So that's a kind of scientific attitude towards things. To be questioning, to learn, not to read, but read between the lines. As they say, not just answer the question, but question the answers. Now that's the kind of scientific attitude.
Right.
We are still very far away from that. Some 2,500 years back, the Buddha gave a very nice definition of science, which I'm very fond of. He said, believe nothing just because it is written in your scriptures. Believe nothing just because your grandfather told you so. Believe nothing because your teacher tells you something merely out of respect for your teacher. Test everything against reality. And if you find it to be true and in the benefit of large numbers, then you embrace it. I think even 2,500 years down, this definition of science is very, very well placed.
True, absolutely. I mean, yes. And you're so right, sir, that, we are so far away from building that scientific thinking among people, and that is where we lack, I think.
And I think that, India has had many, many good scientists. We have very good scientists, but there are just a handful of scientists who have engaged with children. It is much easier to write good research papers than to write good science books for children. It is a very, very difficult task. Scientists from whatever laboratories they work in must reach out, write in simple language about the research for children, for the common people. And I think that would be a good step in that direction.
So, sir, today in the 21st century, everybody is shifting so much into the digital platform. I've seen that children are more and more getting involved in the virtual space. And somewhere the real world is getting lost.
Yes.
How important do you think is it for children to really make and do things with their hands by manipulating objects, the real objects, rather than the virtual space? How do you think that is going to impact in the long run? that, children are switching from real to virtual?
One is, of course, in the last year, we've had a compulsion because of the pandemic.
Right.
So, EdTech companies, online viewing has increased manifold because almost 33 crore children in India, school-going children, have been forced to stay back home. So the only recourse was digital learning, right, and which is now becoming, that it's going to be there for stays. I have a small website, arvindguptatoys.com, that during the pandemic, the viewership increased many folds because people had access to some good content they could go to. Children, before they can understand a concept, they need a lot of experience, experiencing with real things, not just phony things, not just pictures of bananas, but touching bananas, peeling bananas, eating bananas.
Correct.
So they should be able to, they need a lot of experiences of touching, feeling, smelling, pulling things apart, putting them back again, right? Making things work. They need a lot of experience like that. And this does not happen in many of our schools. I've been privileged to visit a few thousand schools. In most schools, you see, most schools would not have a science lab, but it's elite school, they're privileged to have a science lab. Then a good teacher, a kind teacher in class 9th would take them to the science lab and demonstrate how oxygen is made.
Right.
Very few children can actually go to a science lab and mess with lab equipment. That is the reality. A few years back, someone did a survey of the 4 elite cities, the top schools in our 4 elite cities, and asking this question, are our children really understanding science? And they found that there were deep conceptual gaps in their learning because this hands-on learning is not part of our tradition. Right. We must also understand in India, there is a much more emphasis on, rote learning, of regurgitating what has been taught in the curriculum in exactly the same words. If they don't do this, then the marks are cut. So this has become, originality. If a child thinks the answer would be different, then he or she would get very few marks. So this originality of thinking, the approach, the process is not emphasized. It's just exactly the right answer. Otherwise, you lose marks.
Right.
And I think this has come, but doing things, all psychology, all understanding, people who understand children say that the hands, the head, and the heart are all integrated. Right. Children need to do a lot of experiments with their hands before they start understanding. There are 2 cardinal principles of education. The first principle is from the concrete to the abstract.
Right.
The children would start with real life things, touching them, feeling them, dissecting them, cutting them, putting them back again, and slowly. And they must do this with a variety of materials. Right. Today, if you see I just saw some EdTech company in Pune. They've launched a series of toys, a full-page ad in the Times of India. And when I just saw deeper, they were just boxes with cutouts.
Right.
And which is such a shameful thing. Children need a variety of materials. How to put them together, how to stick wood with paper with rubber, how to put in a screw, how to take it out. They need a variety of materials to experiment with, not just one material. Right? Okay. This is very different textures, a different kind of feel they get, different kind of adhesives to use, different kind of tools to use. So this range of experiences is very essential for children. Unfortunately, we are not able to do this. So this from the concrete to the abstract is one. And the second cardinal principle of education is from near to the far. You start with things which are in the immediate environment of the child, absolutely immediate in the household, and slowly you increase this circle, make it bigger and bigger, from local to global, one may say.
Right.
And this does not happen. Most of our school labs, if you go to a school lab, bearets, pipettes, fancy glassware, plasticware, these are alien to a child's life.
Absolutely, sir.
If,
Absolutely.
if, if you bring a child, a poor child, who comes from parents are poor, to a lab like this, very fancy lab like this, it would be totally alienating. They would be at sea. They would not know what to do. If this falls, it breaks, what will I do? So
Right.
as far as possible, we are, by doing this, we are taking children away from science, not bringing them closer to science.
Yes,
Yes.
I totally agree, sir. I mean, I personally feel that our bathrooms, our kitchens, our gardens can be such perfect science lab.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And why are we just not using them? It's like they're storehouses of resources and of a variety.
No, I think we have been brainwashed over the years that learning takes place only in a place called as a school. This is one. And a teacher is the only person qualified to teach the children. So
Right.
this is the kind, we have been brainwashed into these things. But for a child, it's a continuum. They're learning all their lives. As human beings, we're learning all their lives. And home is where children spend most of their time. And it's where the actual learning, the true learning starts for a child right in school, right at home.
Right.
School is much later.
Right. And it becomes so structured in a school that abstractism just kind of loses. I mean, like the child somewhere loses his curious mind, his the discoverer within. And today now that children are just getting into the coding thing. I mean, it's become like coding everywhere, wherein like a 6-year-old or a 7-year-old should be developing his thinking that would help in coding later.
See, you can see children, if you see a 3-year-old, 2-year-old at home in their free moments where they're not being, child who's defined by, बहुत चंचल है बच्चा. A child is very curious, he's a tinkerer, pulling things apart, putting this back again. All the time you see this. They're doing real science experiments. And you see a gleam in a child's eye like that. But when the same child starts going to school, he promptly stops doing all this. He stops messing, as we may call it, and stops messing. He stops tinkering, and he starts mugging things. This is what most of our schools do. They take away the gleam from a child's eye. This is what the schools do. And by the time the child is in class 7th, 8th, there is too much of damage which is being done with it. You can't rectify. There have been, and you said very rightly about coding. And many of the people behind this are these rich edtech companies. Earlier, they tried to drive this fear in the minds of the middle class that, send your child to a coaching school. Otherwise, he or she would not be able to crack the IIT or the NEET. Not in the 10th, 11th. Now they say it's in the 8th or 9th. Now it's the 3rd and the 4th. Right. And now it's coding. If you've not learned coding well, you've missed on something great in life.
Right.
What on earth is coding? What on earth is programming? It's a way of reasoning. It's a way of telling the computer what to do.
Correct.
This is what basic science is. Now, the children who have never done any experiments, never played around with anything, and they get it. And they're cashing on middle class fears. That the children will not be able to make it to a US university. They will not make it to the IITs. And this is what these companies are cashing on. And their perceptive parents, I think they must take all of this jargon with a pinch of salt and trust their own innate judgment. They are parents who have given birth to these children, and there should be some sanity about it. Spend more time with your children. Then the children think that it is important. If parents at home start making things with their own children, then the children will be very happy. They will learn science in a very nice atmosphere of love, of affection at home. And they will become lifelong learners like that. That is what they must do.
And somewhere I feel, learning when it is organic, it is so long lasting and deep. Only when a child is dabbling with things around him in a non-threatened environment like a home.
Right.
I mean, he or she can really learn a lot.
Over here, I would also like to add, there is a person called as Eric Gill. And he has talked a great deal about the discipline of the material, which the material exerts on the learner. I'll give you one example, and this is the example of a. He gives the example of a newspaper, for instance. You just take an ordinary newspaper. Now, the newspaper has a grain in a particular direction, like this. So if I take this newspaper, I'm able to tear out parallel strips like this.
Yeah.
Right? Because it is along the grain.
Yeah.
Now, if I take it the other way, at right angles, you can see that I can scarcely, small bits, they just tear off.
Yeah.
Now, this is the discipline which the material exerts on the learner. It's not the discipline of the adult. He also goes on to say that if you look at wood, for instance, wood is a certain discipline. If you want to plane wood with the planer, you would go along the grain. If you try to plane it across the grain, it would become rougher.
Absolutely.
You take a lump of clay, and if you're a potter, you put in a potter's wheel. Well, if the lump is not in the center, you've had it.
Absolutely.
It's going to wobble and create a lot of ruckus. So it's the kind of discipline which the material exerts. And there are no rights and wrongs. There are no marks over here. But slowly you imbibe that sensitivity to respect material. They're very, very important, I think.
Yes. And also, these concepts that we lay theoretically, actually the child would have experienced it. And this concept would have that every material has its own nature.
Yes.
Every material has its own granular texture. And those kind of things, when they're manipulating objects around, they would have actually learned it on the way. And today we have this jargon of, bring in innovation in children. Children should become innovators. They should become scientists. But why are we losing out on the early childhood and not letting children dabble around with materials? With things around them.
No, very, very. I think children need a very rich experiential base, different kinds of materials, making different things, doing various things. And I think if they have this richness, then much later, there was a very good teacher who set up a school called as Neelbagh, very close to Bangalore, David Horsbrough, a Britisher.
Yeah.
And he very much believed in a certain kind of education. Now, this school was just for village kids, but he had an excellent pottery, a small workshop. He had a carpenter's workshop. And many visitors visit Neelbagh. I went there 3 times in the 80s. And people would ask him, why are you teaching them pottery? Do you want to make them potters? Why are you teaching them carpentry? Do you want to make them, becoming a carpenter, because a carpenter and a potter are very low down in the economic, social hierarchy of our country. People don't take it. But he said, no, nothing like this. Whatever the children do with their hands will help them later in their maths, will help them later in their science. So he earnestly believed in this. And I actually saw a 4th class girl making a cupboard, a wooden cupboard, and taking back in a rural school. So there are immense possibilities with simple things, bereft of this jargon, modern day jargon, which would constitute good, solid learning.
Absolutely, sir. So what do you think about, the divide that we've always had in India between the theory and the practical thing? What should schools do to overcome this whole, this whole gambit of digital learning, of coding, of more and more theory, more and more? They are talking of experiential learning, but when you go to a classroom, like I train teachers and I go to various classrooms, and when I see in the name of experiential learning, it would be probably an experiment or something that they are demonstrating, again, because maybe it is due to large classroom sizes that they are unable to make children do more practical stuff. So how do you see experiential learning finding its place in these large classrooms?
I think that in India we have a very special problem. We are a caste-ridden society, and from childhood we are taught that this is not what you should be doing, right?
Right.
This is it belongs. So it is very deeply ingrained into our childhood. Certain things, learning things, learning a shloka by heart and reciting it is much more looked upon than sitting and watching a carpenter work, right? Or these are thought as menial works. So we have a very strong schism between thinking and doing with your own hands. This is right in the beginning. Schools have hardly been able to touch it superficially. Should invite these various range of craftsmen to the school. And this is not the CBSE decided curriculum, but enlightened. There is this Sardar Patel school in Delhi where I taught for a year and my daughter studied there. Vibha Parsarthi was an amazing principal. And she would say that there is darkness in the school. And the role of a principal, enlightened principal, is to bring a shaft of light every day into the school. And right. anyone who came to, Delhi is the capital of the largest democracy in the world. So many people would come to Delhi. And she had her antennas very tuned. And this Nobel laureate is coming. He's going to Rajghat. And she would just bring him up. She said, "Sir, we run one of the best schools in Delhi. We would like to invite you and address Achukar." All classes suspended for the day.
Right.
And here comes a Nobel laureate. 5 Nobel laureates into the school.
Wow.
Right? That's what a school does. You get a potter into a school, you get a carpenter, you get people with various skills to demonstrate. And most of this is organized not by the principal, not by the teachers, but by the children themselves.
True.
So they learn many leadership skills. I've actually seen Manmohan Singh, before he became the Prime Minister, drive his Maruti 800 into Sardar Patel, give a lecture on economics and drive it back.
Right.
That's what a good school does. It's so many creative people, and get them once or twice into the school. The curriculum anyway would be finished much faster. You would do it much better.
Absolutely. I agree there. In my teacher training workshops, I always say, break that mold. Yeah. If you allow children to dabble around with things, your curriculum will get done much faster.
Absolutely.
And they will all do very well in the exams, because the concept is getting understood very deeply.
Right. And the question which you asked me, that how can you do activities in a large class? I was part of the Hoshangabad science program in the 80s. And, almost 1 lakh children, 1,200 village schools learning science only through activities, no lectures, right? And how did they manage it? And the only ways that you take children on board, you make children your friends.
Yes.
It's the children who distribute the material, the small kit for doing experiments. It's the children who clear it up, keep it back, and they do it because they're thoroughly enjoying it.
Absolutely.
So the teacher does not have to howl or shout or impose discipline from above. This is foolish, because they're doing something life-giving, something which is invigorating, something which makes them so happy and thrilled. Make children partners, take them on board. That is how you can have large number of children do experiments.
Correct. Absolutely, sir. You're so right on target that I just hope teachers are listening and teachers really break that mindset that, this is possible. Another skill that I feel is hugely lacking in our system is lack of observation skills. Children are not spending time observing things. I've so many times have seen many children are very abstract thinkers, like they're actual thinkers. And they would spend time just observing maybe something, one little object, and they would spend time in seeing it or manipulating it or trying to do something like add on or you know, and usually parents and teachers feel that this child loves wasting his time. And somewhere, don't you think, sir, that observation is a critical skill which is missing in our education system?
Well, there is famously, Sherlock Holmes tells his friend that my friend, Dr. Watson, there is a great deal of difference between seeing and observing.
Right.
We see without observing because what we see it very superficially. Observation means that you are absorbed in that, you are critically examining that, you are taking the whole thing into you, right? I think observation is, most of us in schools are never taught about observation.
Yeah.
To critically think, to look at a thing and, how many things can you deduce from it? We are not taught that skill. Very, very important. The other thing which I wanted to, that there is a lot of schism. I've seen this in engineering. I went to a good engineering college, IIT Kanpur, did electrical engineering, and 20 years back, they gave me the Distinguished Alumnus Award. And then the electrical engineering department wanted to honor me. And I just said very humbly, sir, right? I showed them this. This is a small electric motor. I said, I studied 5 years, I studied electrical engineering in IIT Kanpur. But I never made a motor, right? A motor is something which you use at 10 places in a house, right?
Yes.
It's in the mixing machine, it's in the washing machine, it's in the fan, it's in the cooler, it's in the fridge, it's in the air conditioner. But the beauty of the motor I discovered much later.
Right.
So it just shows even in our top leading institutes, which are sort of the best institutes, there is this schism. A lot of the faculty, and it starts from the faculty, which is a PhD from a good American university, but who have never dabbled with anything. Very few have dabbled with their own hands. So it's much more societal. It is not just to a school teacher, it's the big faculty in these universities, in the IITs. And so I think there should be much more emphasis in these institutes of people practicing engineers. Someone who has worked on the railway, like Mr. Sridharan, who set up the metro in Delhi, inviting him to many colleges. We have so many eminent people, inviting practicing people who can bring practice close, who can excite children. That with this theoretical knowledge, ultimately we've got to marry both theory and practice if you want to go to a higher level. Slowly, we need to bridge this gap. A lot of hands-on learning, even within the IITs. Very, very important.
Absolutely, sir. I mean, I just hope that, over the years, we are able to bring that change because we really need it. Otherwise, we will be left behind with just becoming theoretical coders, and with artificial intelligence and machine learning taking over all these so-called structured jobs. I think it is just our abstract thinking, our emotional self that will kind of help us navigate in this digital era. And somewhere we can't lose our children's childhood,
right?
And allow them to dabble around with things. So thank you so much, sir, for sharing your insights. And I just hope we are all together able to make a difference in the way our children learn in school.
Thank you, Vaishali. Thanks.